Rightio. I think we've got some people rolling in already. Good midday, everyone. Good afternoon. I guess we'll get cracking because we've got the recording on and it's 12:01. So thank you for joining us. What I'll do is I'll just share my screen back to the presentation. And today we're just doing a quick half an hour run through on RePRO BI, which is the new genomic technology that Black Box has had the privilege of commercializing. And it was a UQ and MLA funded project. So I'll introduce Elsie, who has been a long-term coordinator of the project and took over where I finished off. So to introduce myself, my name's Shannon and I'm the CEO of Black Box, but previous to this, I was one of the coordinators of the Genomics project. So spent a lot of time collecting the data on all the heifers that went into this project and then handed over the reins to Elsie, who's taken it on since then. So Elsie, I'll leave it to you to give a bit of information on where this all started.
Okay, thanks, Shannon. Thanks everyone for being here. So I'm Elsie, and yeah, I took over from Shannon's role as the Northern Genomics Project Coordinator a few years ago. So what the Northern Genomics Project is a big project run by the University of Queensland, headed up by Professor Ben Hayes and assisted by Dr. Jeffrey Fordyce, who is one of our vets on the ground along with Shannon. So what the Northern Genomics Project aimed to do was to address the challenge that is fertility in Northern Australia. So there are a lot of challenges in Northern Australia, but fertility is one that links directly to profitability of businesses. So it was identified as a key challenge that we wanted to address. So over 7 years, the team have collected data on 36,000 heifers. And the aim was to create a breeding value that would address sort of your multi-breed composite, licorice all sorts of animals in Northern Australia. So basically any animal in Northern Australia with any sort of indicus content is suitable for these breeding values, and it can be compared across the breeds right across Northern Australia. So we're quite proud of where it's come to now. So now that Black Box have commercialized it, we have at the moment 8 traits, soon to be 10 traits, hopefully later in this year. But at the moment we have the key fertility traits. So we've got P4M, which is pregnant within 4 months of calving. So this is your rebreed trait. So really important, of course, when you're wanting to have a calf a year. Of course, that's one of your key profitability drivers in your beef business. So calf on the ground, very important trait. We've got heifer puberty, which indicates how early or late your heifers might be to reach puberty. So obviously the earlier, not always the earlier the better in some cases, but you don't want them reaching puberty after your joining period, of course, your heifer joining. Then we've got our growth traits. So we've got weight, height and condition. And then the adaptation traits of tick, fly, and temperament. So all really important in the Northern beef business system. Do you want me to go into bull selection, Shannon? Yeah.
I'll do bull selection. This is one of my personal favorites. So I'll give your voice a rest. Elsie's battling a cold to jump on here. So I guess we wanted to go through what are some of the applications of this technology. It's really new, really exciting technology, but where do you get the most bang for your buck in terms of effort and dollars? So one of the key things is bull selection. So whether you're doing bull selection within your own herd or you're buying bulls in, what you're effectively buying is a bundle of genetics. That's really all that they're giving you. And if we say that the average bull price is around $5,000 to kind of $6,000, the genomic test is $65, and that's around 1% of the cost. So this is a really good way to spend money in order to determine whether those bulls are contributing positively or negatively towards your herd. And when I think about bull selection, I really think about compound interest. If it's a positive genetic traits that they're bringing into your herd, then they have positive direct siring within 1 to 5 years, but they have a 20-year generational impact because of, especially in obviously replacement heifers and if their progeny is not being sent as terminal. So if it's working towards you and they're bringing positive genetic traits, that's great. We're going to end up at a good spot in 20 years' time. If they're bringing in negative traits, then it can be a really big hole to dig yourself out of. So this is why it's particularly important to test your bulls that you've got within your herd now. And as you make purchases, what we'd really love to see is, of course, like we've probably heard the stat that around only 15% of bulls in Northern Australia are sold with an EBV. And this is a really appropriate alternative, but also a nice adjunct to EBVs in that they are multi-breed. So you can now compare your Brahman bulls with your Brangus bulls with your composites. And it's a cost-effective way for people to do it, which doesn't necessarily require the some of the data capture that was needed in order to be on breed plan and in an EBV. So it'd be really great to see that bulls, and we're displaying some stats later, I think, where bulls are being sold with these numbers, and that's really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
I'll pass over to you, Elsie, to talk heifers.
Yep. All right. So heifers are also a good place to start with your genomic breeding values. So basically, if you have a large heifer cohort that you're narrowing down, potentially as your retention heifers, you can do all the phenotypic selection that you like. It's really important that your heifers are sound and you like how they look. But then you're always going to have the gray area of ones that you don't mind the way they look, but you're not too sure if you want to keep them in your breeding operation, but you have to keep a certain number, of course, to keep your numbers up. So GBVs can be really handy to come in place there, to just, particularly with those maybes. So maybe you're not doing 500 genotypes, but you're just doing, maybe 50 to 100. It can also be a good way to sort of benchmark where your female herd is at. So you can find out where they're sitting and then use those traits to help you inform, bull purchase decisions going forward. If you're doing any advanced RePRO within your herd, if you're doing any embryo transfer or AI programs, using GBVs just to weed out the duds can be a really good way forward. Particularly if you're looking to keep any progeny as future sires within your herd. All really good ways to screen your females.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Like the kind of, it may not be economically viable to do this for every heifer selection, but where you're trying to multiply genetics, it's really important that you're multiplying the right genetics. And this is one of the tools that can definitely help in that. So this is an example of a herd profile, which I think it really points out to one of Elsie's last points in terms of benchmarking your herd. This is kind of the idea behind this. So this, for example, looks at the 8 traits. So we've got weight, hip height, body condition score, puberty, P4M, docility, which is also temperament, tick, and fly. And this is across 514 animals. So what we'd suggest with baselining is, especially when you're buying bulls in, they're representing external genetics, potentially completely new and separate to your herd, depending on how your bull buying patterns from previous years. What you're bringing to your next progeny or your genetic component is in your females, and your freshest genetics is in your heifers. So what we'd encourage people to do in terms of baselining is getting 50 samples randomly across the herd. It's very important not to select your best, phenotypically best heifers or phenotypically worst heifers. You aim to be really just pick randomly throughout that. And then you can send them in and get this herd profile. So basically what we're looking for here, everything is given a rank of 1 to 5, 5 being in the top 20% of the population and 1 being in the bottom 20% population. And what's simply happened here is that it correlates to a color to make it a little easier to interpret. So 5s are our blues and 1s are our reds. And what we're really looking for across this is what are our strongest traits and what are our weakest traits across our herd. So for example, with this, I can see that we've got a fair distribution of blues and greens and even, some yellow in weight, height, and body condition score. Generally, this would be a herd that keeps on its condition quite well, fairly heavy animals, and probably a little bit on like the medium to taller side. One of the traits that stands out for me with this herd is that puberty. We've got a little more red, orange, and yellow, and very little blue. And this is likely to be a later maturing herd. And so that may inform our bull buying decisions. So with this, it's not about looking at the individual numbers. It's really about looking at what should our breeding objectives be, knowing where we are now. And I think I saw a question pop up, but it's disappeared from me. I don't know. Pardon?
That was just Emma telling people to put questions in the Q&A, please.
Oh yeah, sorry, we should have mentioned that at the start. Yeah, pop in any questions if you like. So that's one of the first pieces of information you get back. And you can always give Elsie or myself a call if you need to help interpret that. And this is an example of what individual animal selection can look like. So Elsie, I'll pass over to you if you want to talk through this one. I'm sorry, it's a little bit fuzzy.
Yeah, that's all right. That was my fault. So this was a range of bulls that went through the National Bradford sale last year. So this was how I worked with the producers in determining how we sort of presented that data. So we just took these 4 traits. These traits we have some of the most data on. So in terms of they're probably some of our more accurate traits. So weight, body condition score, puberty, and P4M. So they said, let's just put these 4 traits in a table, and these are the quintile results, and we're going to color code them. So, essentially red is bad, blue is good. That's subjective to an extent, but, just for appearance's sake, that just seemed to be an easy way that anyone can come along, whether they've heard about GBVs or not, and they can see that, bull 749 here, he's a 5 for weight, that just looks good. He's a 5 for puberty, that looks good too, and a 4 for condition score. So then he does fall down a bit where P4M is, so a 2 is below average, which isn't ideal. So it's going back to working out where your herd is at, and which traits you really need to be lifting up in your herd. So if you don't have issues with rebreed, but you are chasing heavier animals, then maybe bull 749 is a good pick for you. He does have a good puberty score, so any of his heifer progeny you would like to think would be early maturers or have a high chance of being an early maturer. If that rebreed is super important to you, then you might look at one of the top 2 bulls. Those 2 both have a slightly better rebreed, particularly 328. So, you can just use this as a good guide if you're a bull buyer or if you're a bull seller. It's a really easy way to present data to your buyers, whether they know anything about GBVs or not. Really simple, very straightforward.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And so just to reinstate that fact, if we're looking at this puberty, so this animal would be in the top 20% for puberty in terms of early maturing. And obviously, as Elsie stated, everybody's needs are different. And there's very few, in fact, I'm not sure I've ever seen an animal that's 5s across the board. And it's about selecting for that balance and what works in your operation. And knowing that this isn't the silver bullet, this is just simply informing on one aspect of it. And it's just the more pieces of information, particularly with bull selection, that we can get in there, the better outcome we'll get for everybody.
Yep.
So the next piece of data that you get back with accompanying the GBVs is also a breed composition. So this again is looking at the makeup of a herd in general, but there is in the spreadsheet tells you the individual animals makeup. And the thing that I'd like to focus on is the Bos indicus content. So this is I think, take the rest of the breeds with a pinch of salt. There can be as much as 10% variation in that. And what we're trying to encourage people is that it's not about finding an animal that's exactly this percent Brahman and shorthorn and Wagyu. It's about one of the biggest factors is this Bos indicus content, especially for the northern operations. So how much can we adapt and keep those like slick coat, able to forage, able to walk, survive in heat, animals that we know are going to be able to live up here, whilst pushing some of the more desirable traits that we want, including fertility, maybe meat quality, and yield. So what we find most people are looking at is where does their Bos indicus content sit that's happy for their environment. And as Northern Australia has such vast differences that like we're up where I am in the tick zone in country that you have to walk pretty far for water at certain points in the year, we probably require a much higher Bos indicus content of at least 50% or greater than somebody who's in more central Queensland and out of the tick zone. So that's one of the pieces of information there. So I guess how much does this all cost? So we have partnered with Neogen to keep this as affordable and easily attainable as possible. And so for the bundle, which includes the 50K snip, so that's the 50,000 bits of information that we take into a supercomputer and give you the GBVs, plus poll, plus the breed composition is $65. And then there's a couple of add-ons because we know people are looking for different things, be that Pompey's myostatin, pesty, or even coat color, as well as parental verification in some cases. So these can all be accessed via the Black Box website. There's a little tab saying Genomics up there, which has everything you need to know. But also you can always give Elsie or myself a call. And we're the ones that have, been there from the start, so should be able to answer most of your questions. I think we've probably got some time for some questions from the floor. So I'll just see.
There's a couple here, Shan, that have come in. So the first one was, can you just explain a little bit further how we collect a GBV sample?
Yeah, okay. So with this, I think we're meaning the DNA sample to submit for the GBVs. So the best way to do it is via a TSU or a tissue sampling unit. And that is basically a little tiny ear notch that gets loaded. You've basically got a little bit of fluid in a small tube and a little small round ear notch thing that stamps out a little hole from the ear and drops it into the fluid. So you need the TSU, you also need the gun that does the application, the applicator gun. And so that's the best way to store DNA samples. It's really stable, they store for a long time. Very few need repeats or anything like that. So that's the most preferred method. Some people do still send in tail hair samples. The important thing with that is that they do still have like the bulb or the follicle on the very end. And but I will say, I think I've probably taken more tail hair samples than most people in the country over my time, and I still get failure rates. And that's really frustrating because once that bull's out of the yard, then you have to wait till next time, have to remember. So I think TSU is the best way to go in terms of, making sure you're not getting a failure rate and you only understand that like 6 weeks later after the lab. I see one, maybe Elsie, if you can answer this one. How do GBVs differ from EBVs?
Yeah, so EBVs are a great tool. but they're very breed specific. So they're a great tool if you're running Angus cattle or Wagyu, or a selection of other breeds that are sort of have a big enough genetic pool and enough data has been collected on those animals. And they have, yeah, really great breeding values out there that can also be genomically enhanced. So for the breeds that aren't serviced by an EBV, there's GBVs. So GBVs, we don't need to know any information about the animal in order to provide a GBV. We just need that DNA sample. So you don't even have to know what breed combination the animal is. If it is a licorice all sort, you just need to send in that DNA sample, and we should be able to give you a rough picture of what breeds might make up that animal. So yeah, basically, if you have the option to access EBVs, we recommend accessing them. And if you don't, then there's GBVs as well. Slightly different traits too. And also depends on if you're a bull breeder, where are your customers and what are they needing to know as well. So yeah, all good tools available, and it's just working out what's suitable for you in your situation.
Yeah, and to pick on that last point about bull breeding and customers, and that's been a lot of our customers today have looked at whether it's worth doing the EBVs and the GBVs, and it does come down to, are your customers ultimately buying, just straight grey Brahmins, and that's all they're looking at, and in which case, if they're all got EBVs, then that's a really good option, although this offers a few additional traits. But if you're, as a lot of operations are doing, they're buying not only grey Brahmins, but they might be buying, red Brangus or Droughties at the same time. And this is the only tool currently on the market that enables them to benchmark all of them and make the right selection for their place. Yeah, and then I've got another question. I can take this one. What further traits will be added? So Elsie alluded to 2 extra traits coming hopefully September, and these are teat and udder. So teat, really looking at bottle teats, and like udder formation and whether that falls apart. So that'll be really exciting to add. And then this is a really quickly evolving space, and we're hoping to be able to add even more multi-breed traits to it, particularly looking at rounding out. So not just fertility and female traits, but further into growth, meat quality, stayability within the herd as well. And then there's some exciting research coming out of CSIRO regarding bull semen traits. So hopefully we can look to include all of those in the future.
So I've had one come in, Shannon. So where do I start with my herd and GBVs? Like, which animals would you sort of say are top priority for getting GBV results?
Yeah, I think it does depend on what type of operation you're running, but if it's a commercial herd and I'm buying my bulls in, I would genotype all the bulls that I've got in the herd, and use that to make decisions about culling bulls. Normally obviously there's other decisions like bulls that may break down, and you're looking to cull for age anyway, but definitely the ones that you're looking to retain for next year, genotype all of those, and then let some of those aspects inform purchase decisions for the following year. So yeah, that can be, if you're buying from multiple places, going, okay, look, these genetics are probably more appropriate for our place. Or if you're buying from one place, they'll have that lineage and parentage on it and go, look, we really want more of this, and a bit less of this. And so you can make those decisions for next year. Ideally, obviously, the bulls will be sold with that, but this is pretty new and evolving technology, so it's going to take a little while to get there. But that's where I definitely start. And then I would also do a heifer baseline, so just 50 random samples, and go from there. And then if I was in a stud based scenario or breeding my own replacement bulls, I would be taking samples and genotyping anything that I see could be a bull. So at a weaner stage. So as opposed to waiting for like the 400 and 600 day semen test, I would be taking samples then and determining, is this an animal that's worth keeping entire or not? And this opens you up to more market opportunities, of course. And so allowing you to sell something like a fat bullock as opposed to having to sell something as a cull bull in another year's time. And it especially makes management a little bit easier. I think with all of these things, though, what we really want to impress is like this is only one part of the puzzle. And there's so many contributions that go into that happen between the genotype and the information that we tell you and the phenotype, and which is what you actually see on farm. So, you know, kind of genetics is only really going to ever be 30%. There's management and nutrition. And so what we really want to impress is that we can tell you that this animal is genetically perfect potentially, but we can't tell you whether it's got 3 legs. So confirmation and selection and sound selection is really, really important. And that would always be our first step in choosing to cull or keep. Avoid being over scrutinous in terms of trying to choose like the really nice, fat, sleek coated ones. But certainly they've got to be animals that can, you know, eat grass, walk to water, and have a calf.
Excellent points.
Okie doke. I think we're nearing the end of time. So what we'll do, this recording will go up, we'll probably pop it on YouTube and we'll send a link around to people. Are there any other questions before we wrap up and people head to lunch? Smoko, second smoko, pumpkin scones. Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. Mine and Elsie's contact details are on the website. Otherwise, you can also email us at genomics@blackboxco.com.au. If there's any other questions, please get in touch. We're really, really excited to bring this to everybody, and it's a really quickly evolving space. So yeah, really excited about that. Thank you for joining us.